Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good Wednesday today. Uh, Today's topic for the webinar, we've been going through product and listing builders, going through all the different settings and workflows that you can set up on the product or listing builders, and then go through a few common use cases for using those to help streamline your workflows to make things a bit easier for you. So we'll get started on this. And as always, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to post them in the Q&A section or the chat, and I'll get to those as we get to a good point. So first off, we'll go into the product builder, which is the process of moving products from your source inventory to your product catalog. This is a pretty important step, especially for retailers using multiple suppliers who may carry the same item between those suppliers. This is the step where it merges those two products from two different feeds into a single product in the catalog. And we do that by using a unique identifier. Typically, we go off a UPC or MPN, but there's also use cases where we can use an EAN, or you can use a custom field that we call reference identifier. That's useful where maybe you have a list of your own SKUs that you already have on your website, and you know which supplier SKUs link up to those. We can set a mapping set to provide that information in the reference identifier field. And then we can use that when we're building the products or building the source inventory into products to merge on those items. And then we can also set another rule to actually use that as the true SKU on the output of the items. That way everything will link up fine on your channel. So we'll start diving into the settings here. So first off, to get into the product builder, you'll start in your source inventory tab. And it'll be this create products button. If you don't have any items selected in your source inventory, you won't be able to select that because building items is a selection-based action. So you can use any of the filters, any of our predefined filters, or any additional filters that you'd like to use throughout this. So maybe we want to look for items that have a wholesale cost, maybe greater than $10. And then we want to find any items that aren't currently linked. This just means these are items that haven't been built into the product catalog yet. So we've got a few here. We'll just select this first page for our use here. And if we click create products, first thing that's going to pop up is selecting your builder and selecting your mapping template. So the builder is where the settings live regarding merging items and data priority. So we'll open up that one first. So let's just click create new builder. And when you do this, it's going to come up with a name. Basically, it says default automatically created. Always recommend changing this to something you'd recognize, maybe even something as obvious as use this builder. Or maybe you can just call it your default product builder, something like that. And then I always recommend checking off this use as default builder. What this does is whenever you go back to click create products after you've gone through this first step, it'll automatically pre-select this builder. So that way any settings you've updated will always be applied and always be ready for you there instead of having to go through that drop down and potentially select out of multiple builders that you may be using. If you're using a general default one, I always recommend checking off that item or that checkbox there. The next section, this is the match rules. This is where we decide that common identifier between multiple source products, how we identify those matches when we're building those products into the product catalog. So you can choose the fields that you want to select here. Typically, we're going off a UPC or MPN. You can select both of those fields to match on if you want. A little less common is EAN or ASIN. Typically, we don't see those fields coming through from suppliers. But if you're one of those that has a supplier that provides that information across multiple feeds, you'll be able to use either of those fields. And then reference identifier. This is where I was saying this could be a custom field that we apply onto the products, either using a mapping set or maybe another unique identifier that you know is available in these feeds that is common across them. But the main goal here is if we are wanting items to merge from multiple sources, we need to know a unique field between them. That's really the ultimate outcome of this. So either using UPC, MPN, EAN, ASIN, or setting up a custom reference identifier to be able to merge those is going to be a requirement for that. So for our use case here, we'll just select UPC. And then under advanced options, this essentially says, do you want to find those matches and merge them? If you have this, by default, we have these both set as yes, because typically you are wanting to merge those items. But if there's a specific use case where you want to have those as separate products and separate listings on your channels, you can always come in and click do not attempt to create the new product variants. Or that's just if you don't want it to match and don't build if there is a match, you would select this one. But then for the second option here, if no match is found to an existing product variant, do you want to allow the unmatched inventory variants to be created? So that's basically saying if there isn't a match, do we want to go ahead and build them? Yes, we'll want to allow those to go through. So depending on your use case there, you can modify these to get to your desired outcome. Now, what we found when doing these matches, potentially some suppliers may have some outdated data feeds, or maybe they have some deprecated SKUs that may have the same UPC as some new SKUs in their feed, or just potentially have, maybe when using MPN, maybe there's just a potential to have some overlap of MPNs that aren't exactly unique to these items. So this is a way to prevent those mismatches where we're trying to merge one product, even though it is a match on MPN or UPC, and it's merging into another item that is a totally different item. So one way to do that is by cost. So maybe setting a threshold here where if the two items match and their cost is more than a certain threshold difference, then instead of building those items, it will throw it for a review, which would be under this builder issue filter here. So you can set that threshold to be whatever you'd like. By default, we have it to 100, but we see most folks drop that down to maybe a 30 or 50% threshold. It just doesn't guarantee it's an issue. Maybe there's one supplier where it is just that much cheaper, but this is just a good way to help mitigate those mismatches. And we can add certain rules here where the brand must match between them. If it doesn't, throw it for review. And then another important one here is a title rule. So maybe you're dealing with a source or suppliers who carry multi-packs of the same item. Maybe they have that item as a single unit, as a 6-pack, as a dozen pack, so on, but they all have the same UPC, right? So what'll happen there is it's going to try to merge those items into a single product, even though it has the same UPC. It is a different item, so we won't want to actually merge those. So what you could potentially do here is set some rules in the titles if it contains case or pack, or maybe an abbreviation of those. Sometimes we see CS or PK. And you can set this to review or completely fail. So depending on your data and how you see it as you're working through it, typically we recommend setting this to review. So after you build the items from your source inventory to your product catalog, and we see some of the products contain, case, pack, CS, or PK in the title, it'll throw it into review queue for you. So that way you can go back and say, okay, yep, these should be merging, these shouldn't be merging. And then you can go through and work through that as they come up. And another important one here are the rebuild settings. And this ties into our data priority that I'll get to at the bottom here. But when you are building products, maybe at different times, maybe you bring in one source, you build that source's items into the product catalog. Then a few weeks down the road, you add a new source that carries some of the same products as your original source. And it turns out they have a much better product titles and descriptions, just a lot better product data coming through from this new source. And let's say you move them all the way up to the top, and your original source really doesn't have that good of data. So you move them all the way down to the bottom of your list because you want to use that new source's data as your priority. Because you've already built that original source's product into the product catalog, when we go to attach that new item, it simply just attaches it. It doesn't rebuild the item or adjust that product data to take into account your new source priority. And that's essentially what these settings are saying, is if I do add a new product or a new variant from source inventory to the product catalog and it matches to an existing one there, Do we want to rebuild that item, which means it's going to rebuild that item, take into account our new data priority, and if there are better titles and descriptions from that new source and it is the top priority, it will use those through. So really, I always recommend, in most cases, just checking off all 4 of these options, because that's going to cover you in all scenarios to make sure whenever you're adding new source inventory and building those products into the product catalog, as long as you're updating your source priority here, as you really should be, that's going to be the best way to carry that over and make sure those items from the product catalog get updated as you add new sources to those products. Hope that's clear. If there's any questions on that, definitely post them in the chat, and I'll do my best to clarify if there wasn't anything that made sense there. Now, these next settings, truthfully, we'd leave all of these as the default, but we'll run through these really quick just to make sure everyone's aware of what these mean. So the first one, duplicate source match setting. When building products, if 2 or more inventory variants from the same source have the same matching field, then what action do you want to take? So kind of going back to my previous point on the case packs and the sizes, if there are 2 products coming from the same source that have the same unique identifier, we can't merge those into a single item, right? Because there's 2 different SKUs, and then when we merge those, we have no way of determining which is the right one that should be fulfilled, because typically they should be all separate items in that feed from the source. So that's one good thing that we'll catch, just to make sure everything is flowing smoothly, especially when it comes back to order routing and the other side of the equation. So typically you just want to review those, or you can choose to fail, which just means it's not going to build. It's not going to give you a notification that there may have been an issue there. So typically leaving this to review is a good use case, just so you can go back and take a look at those products at a later time and make sure that they are matching correctly, or if it was an incorrect match, you can review that and choose a valid outcome once you see that. And then this next one is for archive settings. When building product variants, if all the matching inventory variants are archived, what actions do you want to take? So when you're going through the builder, if you select all items and they're going to be merged into a single product and they're all archived, so what do you want to do there? Because if they are all archived at the time, there's probably a good chance that you don't want to build those into a product because they're unavailable and archived from the suppliers. Another option to do here is just go ahead and create it, or do we want to review it? Again, just give you another notification to be able to come back and take a look at that. So typically we see most folks sticking with review it, but you can just go ahead and choose create the variant to just force it through. Maybe your sources will mark stuff as archived, but with the idea knowing that it might be coming back in stock at a later time. So if you go ahead and create it, that way you at least know you have the product built, and once it gets new inventory, it will go ahead and update on that built item. So going into the next one here, the parent attachment settings. So these rules determine how existing parent products should have newly created variants attached to them when necessary. So typically going through this, all of these default ones are fine. Using the intelligent one uses some specific data points to go through it there. When we do find those existing product variants, how are we going to merge those or attach the additional variants to it? Typically, just go ahead and attaching them is going to be the best option there. You can also set that to review, but a lot of times there's going to be a lot to review because there are some additional steps going through this intelligent process that our system takes to make sure they're attaching them properly. So truthfully, I haven't seen a reason to not go with the default on attaching these. But if you do run some issues on that, definitely schedule a support call and we can look into your specific use case and come up with the best workflow for you there. And then duplicate SKU setting. So a lot of platforms won't let you have the same SKUs for items that multiple times on your channel, because that should be kind of a unique field for you there. So this question is just asking, when creating product variants, if the SKU already exists, what do we want to do? So if there already is an existing SKU for a different item that's in your product catalog, this just triggers a review for you. And then this one's an easy one to review. If you do want to have that product go through, you can manually modify that SKU through that review notification that pops up after you've gone through building your product catalog from source inventory. And this next one, this last setting here is default product fields. So this has to do with parent products. So if your parent products don't have any images or titles, you can choose to automatically use a variant of that parent to supplement that title or image. So if you have parent products that come through without a title or without an image, you can select this option to populate that with the variant title or variant image as it makes sense there. And then source priority. So diving into this a bit more, this is how you, when we are merging products and building those into the product catalog, if it is available from more than one source, whose source's data gets the win, right? Whose title am I going to use? Whose description is going to win? Images and so on. So this is a way for you to rank your sources on the best way, or I'm sorry, rank the sources based on their data available. So in this example, if we have RSR at the top and there's another item coming from USD, US Direct here, from these two sources, if they're both coming from here and it gets built out, it's going to use as RSR's data as a top priority. So we're going to have their titles, their descriptions, their images, and so on. So this is a way for you to rank that. But we also have field specific priorities because maybe some suppliers have a better title, some have a better description. So you can really fine tune and mix and match how it builds out that final product in your catalog when it is coming from multiple suppliers. So you can say maybe for my parent title, I want to have USD Flex as the top one. And then maybe I know CWR has really good descriptions. So we can go ahead and say for description, we'll put CWR at the top here. So you can go through and fine tune this for all of your fields if you want to pick and choose which source is going to win the data race to get to your product. Now, once you have all of this configured, you can go ahead and click Save and Continue, and this will save all of your changes for that product builder that you just created there. Any questions so far on the product builder section? Go ahead and post them in the chat or the Q&A section, and I'll get to those for you. All right, no questions so far. So we'll get into the mapping template side of things. So again, similar idea on the mapping template as for source mapping or channel mapping. It's basically where are we moving data points to and from, right? So if you take a look at this default one here, typically the default one is going to be great for most use cases because you've already mapped the data in from the source, the source data into particular fields. And essentially, all the product builder mapping template is doing is going one-to-one. So we're mapping the inventory parent SKU to the product parent SKU and attributes over and so on and so forth. But you can come in here and start using some mapping sets or maybe some rules to help clean up your data. So we'll get into that in just a second. But you can see through this mapping template, again, we're mapping inventory variant SKU to the product variant SKU and so on, just to make sure all these are mapping over from the source product data. A few things you might see missing here would be any of our price fields or quantity fields, right? So MSRP, MAP, cost, list price, or quantity. And the reason we don't have these on a mapping template is those are built to pass all the way through. And those values are modified in our aggregate rules or product listing pricing rules. So that'll be another webinar that we'll get into. But there's a reason they're not here is because you're really not modifying that data in this sense in a mapping. It's handled more through our aggregate rules and our pricing tool workflow to really get and fine tune that data. But going into mapping sets here. So this is where you can start cleaning up maybe brands or even categories. If you remember from our category mapping webinar that Brian went through with us, there's a way to use a mapping set and rules here to modify categories. But another way to do this is possibly for like brands. A lot of times going through multiple sources, brand names may have, some may have apostrophes in them, some may not. Some may even be shortened up a bit. So there's some things you can do here to help mitigate that and clean up the brand name. So if we create a new mapping set here, go to settings and mapping and sets. Let's create a new brand mapping set for this example. Brand cleanup. So essentially here we're going to say convert from one value to another. So this is something you can do in a bulk upload. If you have a CSV file that has the value you want to convert from and the value you want to convert to in a different column, you can map those in here. We can also just go ahead and add a few one-off. So say we're selling firearm cleaning supplies. So Hoppies is a good brand here. So maybe you have things like this where it has Hoppies with a apostrophe, but we want it to be all unique without that apostrophe there. Or maybe some of them just come in as HOPPE and you want to modify those. So this is a way that you can easily, maybe another one comes like that. So this is a way to say, if we see any of these values come in, modify them to all the same value here. So that way it cleans it up on the data import, and you're not going to have multiple brand names when trying to push those out to your sales channel that are all kind of spelt differently here. So you can save this mapping set. And if you go back to the mapping template here, I might have to refresh this since I just added that. Close this and reopen the builder. All right, there's the mapping set. So once you've created that there, we're saying the input value is going to be from the inventory, the source inventory brand field. And we're going to say, look at this brand cleanup set. And if it's one of those on there, that's going to translate it to that output value on the mapping set. And you also have an option here where really wouldn't apply for this brand one. But if there are no rules that match that in the mapping set, then just go ahead and leave it as the brand value that's coming from the source. Or for some reason, if you want to have another default value put in there for all brands, you can do that. Wouldn't really work in this use case. We see this more useful in possibly categories or some other cases where maybe if there isn't a match on that mapping set, you want to flag it as a certain value so you can come back and maybe update that manually. But typically in this brand scenario, we would just leave this as the input value. And you can do the same with a category cleanup here. If you have a category mapping set, you can apply that and use that. And really you can do this across all of them, any of the fields here. Another common use case we see is sometimes titles have some abbreviations in them, like maybe BLK for black or BLU for blue, and you want to clean those up a bit more. That you can use really a rule here. So we can say, maybe call this color cleanup. We say if the incoming value equals maybe BLK, or maybe it equals BCK, then we are going to replace that field with black. So that would be a way to modify this, essentially to get to a more common title and streamline all of your products as you're building them here. So if we go back to our product builder, so we've set up our mapping template. So again, if you are doing customizations on these mapping templates and you're setting them up for the first time, go ahead and check off this default one so that way it's saved and it's always selected when you come in to create your products. And then, so let's actually update this filter really quick. Let's go back to our not linked items. And now we have our product builder created. We have our mapping template set up. And now the next step is just to click create products. And something really cool that actually just got released about an hour ago by our development team. A lot of folks have been asking for this is we can see a progress bar now on most of the jobs that we're running within Flxpoint. So now whenever you go to create products or create channel listings, it'll tell you that the job's starting soon. And then once it starts running, it'll give you a percentage to completion there. So that we can keep an eye on things and have some insight onto how far the products have completed through that builder. Any questions so far on any of these builder mappings or the mapping templates or any of the settings in there so far? All right, awesome. So we will get into the listing builder side of things now. So we just went through source inventory and the product builder, which gets products into our product catalog. And now the next step is moving those products from the product catalog to our channels and creating listings for those. So when you are creating channel listings, you are building listings for each individual channel. So when you build from source inventory to product catalog, we merge products into single products into the product catalog. When you're building products from the catalog to channel listings, you're building a listing specific for each channel. So in your channel listings page, you will see a SKU multiple times if you are building it for more than one channel on your in your Flxpoint account. So a very similar process for building items from the product catalog to channel listings. You would go through, select which items you want to choose. So we'll just choose our first page here. When you go to create listings, like I said, you are choosing a specific channel here. So you would choose which channel you want to build it for. So let's choose my Shopify store. And there is another mapping template here where you can do channel specific modifications. Maybe through your product builder, there are some rules you wanted to implement, but you only really need them to apply for certain channels. So in that case, you would not apply them on the product builder, but just apply them on a specific channel listing builder. Sometimes folks will maybe add a prefix to their a specific channel. Maybe if they're selling on Amazon, they'll add AMZ to it. So you can always do that here at a building level. Another useful feature we'll see here, especially is with category mapping for the channel listing level for folks selling on GunBroker or Walmart. As Brian mentioned on the previous webinar, that's a very good use case for doing a category mapping and translation to fit into those categories that are required from GunBroker or any of the marketplaces like Walmart that require you to fit a specific category structure. And again, whenever you're creating a new builder, I always recommend using it as the default one. So that way it's already selected for you as you go ahead and build more listings further on. And again, all these are a one-to-one mapping. So unless you are doing any translations here, you can always do that. Another common question we have, or not question, but request is, maybe when on your website or your channel, you don't want to expose the true supplier SKU. Maybe you want to hide that and put in some sort of random SKU. For whatever reason, we do see a request for that pretty regularly. So what you can do, maybe it's a particular channel, maybe your Shopify store, you don't want to use the true supplier SKU. So what you can do, instead of selecting parent SKU as the mapping here, you can use the product ID, which is going to be the internal Flxpoint ID for that product. So if you actually open up one of these, I'm going to leave this mapping template here and open up one of these products. This value that's at the end of the URL when you're looking at a parent, this is going to be the parent ID. And when you're in the variant view, that's going to be the variant ID. These are all generated internally in Flxpoint, so it won't have any relation to a supplier SKU on your website. So it's a way to help kind of hide that for whatever reason. And then with Flxpoint, as it's building these items, it establishes that link through all the steps. So even if you change the SKU at this step to that product ID and list it on your website, when we get an order for that item, Flxpoint knows, okay, we've changed the SKU at the listing level, and it's going to go back and look at the product. And then when you go to generate a PO and it goes through your order routing rules, it picks a supplier, and then we'll choose the true supplier SKU to send to that supplier for order fulfillment. So that's just a use case I want to point out. Some folks have requested that and have a use case for that. So if we go back to our listing builder here, we select our template, and then this last toggle here is for linking listings. So a lot of times, maybe you already have pre-existing listings on your website or sales channel that you just want to link quantity and pricing to and keep that in sync. There's no need to overwrite titles or descriptions or create a new, duplicate SKU of that. So this is a way for us to identify those pre-existing items on your website and match that against listings that you're building for that channel within Flxpoint. So this first checkbox here is, what data point do I want to use in Flxpoint to compare to a data point on the sales channel? So if you look here for Shopify, we can either match on barcode or SKU. Typically, folks use barcode on Shopify as UPC. So you can say match the Flxpoint UPC field to the Shopify variant barcode and use that to look for matches. Or alternatively, we can do SKU to the Shopify variant SKU. So what will happen here, if I select SKU to SKU and I check link after build, if I click do not link, it's not going to try to run that or try to find any matches. But if we choose link after build and we select SKU to SKU, first it's going to go through a job to build all of the listings that we've queued up to create right now. And then after it does that, it's going to essentially look at all the data that's on your website or your sales channel, especially this for this particular data point, and then compare it to this data point in Flxpoint. If we get a match, Flxpoint establishes a link to that existing item, and then it'll be available to sync price and quantity updates to that item on your website or sales channel. If it doesn't find a link after that happens, the product will simply show as not listed in the Flxpoint channel listings page. But maybe you did start this run off a SKU and it got a lot of matches, but you go back and you're like, I know some of these other products are on my website. Maybe I didn't keep the SKU exactly the same, but I do know the UPCs match. So you can start and run this link listings after build for SKU to SKU. And then once all that's completed, you can come to your channel listings page and say, well, I want to try it again and see if any of the ones that didn't link will match on UPC. And you can do that. So after the original link listings run, you can come back to actions and click relink listings. And then we'll do this for the channel we want to do. And then you can change this to then look at UPC and barcode. And this isn't going to try to relink items that were previously linked. It's not going to overwrite that connection. This is simply looking at items that currently haven't been linked for that channel. So it gives you a second step to possibly find more matches if you know that previous data point you were using wasn't a perfect match for some reason, and there's more items that should be matching on your website. Hope that made sense. Put any questions you have in the chat, and I'll definitely do my best to clarify those for you. All right, so we had a good question come in. Is SKU and UPC the only two fields available to link? No, it depends on the channel. So I was showing the example for Shopify here, and we have an option for SKU and barcode to match on. But if I go and look at, say, my Amazon channel, I have ASIN, product ID, and SKU. So you can choose different fields depending on which channel you're connecting to try to get that best match there. So it really just varies and depends on which channel you're connecting to see which actual data point is exposed that we're able to match to. All right, so if there is any other product builder or listing builder questions, feel free to post any general questions here. I'll give everyone a minute in case there are any questions here that we can go over. All right, looks like we don't have any more questions on this. So we'll call it a wrap today. I appreciate everyone for joining today. Hope you all have a good rest of your week. And those of you celebrating the 4th this coming weekend, hope you all have a great time, and we'll see you next week.